One of the things that will help you move forward faster and smoother towards your goals is to get anyone helping you, anyone working with you, any of your team working all in the same direction. When moving towards a goal, the best thing you can do is get aligned. How do you get aligned? By seeing the value of the reality of the truth. Be able to look in the mirror and have the real conversations.
Hey everybody, Jeff here. Before we get started, if you're getting value from the podcast, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For those of you listening on podcast apps, don't forget to rate and review. Your support really helps the show reach more people, and for that, I am truly grateful. Now let's dive in.
Welcome to the Point with Jeff Spikes.
Hello and welcome to The Point. Today, imagine what greatness exists within you, and let's talk about and think and consider what are some of the biggest things that make a difference. Something that's been requested when we engage in a conversation to discuss what type of gains happen in a workshop or in working with a company to help them scale or help them move forward through an obstacle they've been facing. It starts to come up, this consideration of what success looks like and what are those hinge points? What are the things that happen that really make a difference for the people that we work with? We're going to roll our sleeves up a little bit and talk about things that aren't always the easiest thing to talk about. And the reason I share that is that most of the time when working with owners, there is the feeling of sensitivity around the deepest points that make the biggest impacts. And some of the greatest gains come from a sense of proprietariness, right? Because when helping you change what you need to change or what you'd like to change, that ends up being that one thing you look back on and go, wow, that made the biggest difference. It's oftentimes something that seems so minute, or maybe seems, wow, could that really be what was holding me up? Could that really be what was stopping the energy flow, stopping the flow of the finances or anything else? Do I really want to share that? Or is it easier and better to just talk about the brass tacks of business or the brass tacks of change, those specific pinpoints of things and change that make things different? I guess there's a question of why is it so challenging to lay it all out sometimes? And why is it challenging to get to the key idea? Now, when this first really became clear, it was more around a conversation of thinking about what's the one thing, right? What's the one thing that I could do today that makes the biggest difference of all things that I'm wanting to impact? So if you can ask yourself that question, it's not uncommon to get feedback on, wait a minute, but it's not just one thing. And that's exactly true, right? So it's not just one thing, but that's not the question. The question isn't, is there only one thing I could do? The question is, out of all the things, out of all the many things that you need to do, that you have on your list, that you feel overwhelmed by, or maybe excited by, of all these things that you have the opportunity to do, put in front of you. The question is, out of all of those things, what is the one thing you could do next? What is the one thing you could do now, being in the moment? What is the one thing you could do today that would make the biggest difference? Now, in one case, I'm just going to take some time to share some actual stories of things that have worked. And I don't want it to escape that in the nature of this podcast and the nature of this show, one of the things that we're talking about as a core baseline is that one thing about you, that part of you that is extremely unique, that is special about you, that helps you move forward in the world and make the impact you're meant to make, different from anyone else. And there's this confusion that happens inside about what is uniqueness and what is belonging and what is special, and is there really anything special, and what is humility, and what is being humble, and what is being of service versus being of greatness, or any other type of conflict you may have. Now, that makes me think of a situation that's happened here recently where I went through a process with one of the quantum strengths clients that were doing some major breakthrough. And the comment was, wow, I've been talking to my therapist about this for months, maybe even a year. And you just helped me resolve that in 20 minutes. And it was a basic internal resolution of two competing thoughts of what they both meant, and starting to look at that from a basis of values and what those parts were that were conflicting within, that didn't line up and was causing some type of gap or problem that was seemingly inconsequential. It didn't really matter too much. However, this part of doubt, this part of lacking self-confidence that allows those types of minor things to sneak in, that we just become accustomed to and become a topic of conversation for therapy, or become a topic of conversation of something that becomes part of our identity. So if you've allowed something that was a strategy to become part of your identity, that then is a limiting belief or behavior that is also connected to some inner conflict of why you wouldn't stand into your greatest self or your greatest strength or your greatest power of influence and being of service to others. And there's that little bit of doubt that says, this is why I shouldn't do it. Sometimes just a simple conflict resolution, an internal conflict resolution, is that answer. And it clears the block to many other things. So that was the case in this. And we'll see moving forward how that begins to impact many other decisions in life. But when going through this process, one of the things that we find is commonly is that there's something simple. Two or three things that happen in one of the first major engagements I was in during a time of discovery where I knew what I was doing and I was moving forward, but I didn't have the confidence just to say, this is what I do and this is what it's worth. I was showing up and I was a natural in what I was doing. I was working at Starbucks, and we were really working at moving forward towards changing how the service industry was approaching how to fix things in the stores and the restaurants. It was a big shift and change for those types of companies. Anyway, it was during that time, and I was working with a lot of companies, helping them look at what their identity was and how they could be a better service and make more money. And I moved over into another company, and one of the major shifts that didn't seem to make any difference was an owner was concerned about spending the money to get involved with a trade association. They didn't want to go and get involved in this. It's not that they didn't want to. They were conflicted about what type of return of investment would happen if they went and attended. And I went ahead and took the risk. The owner wasn't available. I don't remember where the owner was. I had left Starbucks and was now working for one of these organizations. The owner was not available to make a decision. I went ahead and made a decision and said, I'm going to this alone, and I'm going to pay the money I need to. And it was probably a $1,200 total spend. But at the time, things were tight. We were watching every penny, which leads into another part of the conversation. And I did this. And at the end, it was, I didn't give you approval. I didn't tell you could do that. And I said, I don't think that you would have, because at the time, this individual had not really given an answer as to whether or not to go or not, and left it in our hands. I made the decision. When you were given the opportunity to make the decision, you didn't make the decision. And this is what I believe that needs to happen today. Well, within a month or two, a couple of clients were landed that were immediately within that first few months of doing business with them worth about $30,000, $40,000. And then look at, okay, we spent $1,200 and I spent X amount of time that took me out of the things that I was doing in the office. And now we have a $30,000 or $40,000 result for a couple of different clients, which is now $100,000 plus win for a $1,000 to $1,200 investment. Fast forward a few years, this company had major booths, was spending 30, 40, 50, even $60,000 at different times to be engaged with this association, because they saw the value and they started to understand what was that number one thing that ended up really being important. It was having an experience and a place to be where you could be part of a community with your customers and begin to understand better what they need. And then not only just engaging as an owner or as salespeople, but getting your entire team to find ways to engage in that organization and get to know other people in the organizations you serve, and just become part of the community and greater understand all of the obstacles and things that they were facing. But in this case, going to this trade association is a good part of the conversation because it had to do with the owner being perceived by the staff as a Scrooge, for lack of better words, and someone who was too thrifty, didn't, and that was translating into doesn't really care, doesn't want to give us what we need to get the job done. It's a fight to do what we need to do to make it happen. And there's a big question that comes up of now we're attracting staff and people that like that fight, that want that fight, that feel better working in that environment. And that creates a culture. So oftentimes you may be looking in your environment as a business owner, you may be looking in your environment and saying, man, we don't have a culture. We need to work on our culture. And I would challenge to say, you have a culture that you've created and that your team has created. And you might want a different culture and you might want to manage that culture and be more intentional about what that culture is. Let's not avoid the look in the mirror that says, okay, there is a culture that we've created. And by standing in that truth and taking ownership of that reality, we can gain hope and give hope to everyone else that there's a solution and that we could do something better. We could find a better culture and create one intentionally that includes everyone. Well, in this case, it was seemingly simple once done, but the process of getting to what is the best way to handle this was a little bit of a longer jump. And also getting the owner and the other staff that were involved, that were decision makers, to buy into the importance of what we were talking about because it became an issue of understanding. It was about gaining understanding. And when it boiled down to it, it was a major gift and strength and beautiful thing for that owner. Now, that owner had a belief that he was given as a kid because his father was a business owner, where he was taught not to do all these fancy things, not to get new vehicles, not to get into major lease contracts, not to XYZ, because not to get the best phone package, not to get the best whatever. And there were certain other things that were critical to mission, like making sure you get the right parts, the best parts, the things that work. You don't pinch on it. There's other things that you do. But the entire mission, vision, and understanding of why, the big why, was because when times get tough, you don't ever want to have to let someone go because you didn't protect them. So there was this understanding that by him being thrifty, by him being really tight on these resources, that he was protecting the people he loved and he had a passion for wanting to feed more families and employ more people so that there'd be more sustenance based on the efforts of what he was putting out. So that was part of his legacy, part of his understanding of what he wanted to create in the world. But that was an unknown, unspoken, confusing because people saw it. You can't help but see something that's strong and beautiful in you. So if you're having a result, there's with people around you, it's clear. It just may not be purposed and understood. So we can't hide what's strong. We can't hide what's best. And oftentimes the perception of that then gets weakened. And that takes us to that point of talking about what is unique about us. We started that conversation earlier in this. And what is unique about you? What is special about you? And I will say that's best thought of under the understanding of what is similar. How do you connect into the world? What are the things that are the same? You live in the same zip code. You live, you have the same interests. You might dress similarly. You might look the same. You might not look the same, but all of these external things that are similar, you might have some of the similar beliefs. You have the similar strategies of how to handle challenges, especially if they're environment related. So yes, we have a lot of similarities and you have a lot of similarities with others around you. And if you focus on those similarities, there is a humility and there is a connection and a bond that happens that's very beneficial to our psyche and to how we interact in the community and our effectiveness and in things that we want to achieve. So all of that's wonderful. Then the question is, there's sometimes this push to say, let's not think we're unique. I hear a lot of people wanting to coach and encourage younger people by saying, you are not unique. Get over yourself. There's nothing special. And in the perception of the purpose of that conversation, that might be a really valuable conversation for someone to hear. You may need to hear that. I've needed to hear that at times in my life. Let's get to the point about what is special and unique. And what's special and unique about every individual, about you, is your perspective and your approach, how you go about getting something done. When we mirror and mimic each other, and we're not working at our best self. But when you can implement and find that best approach for you, considering how other people approach it, not just mimicking how other people approach solutions, happiness, success, whatever it is you define as something you want to approach, could be as simple as making your bed in the morning. It's all about that approach. And if you come about it your way, it will then laterally move into every other area of your life. So when you get involved in design your strengths, you will make some basic changes on some small goals, and then all of a sudden find that many other things in life have gotten much easier. That's the gift. Some of our clients, even at some stage of this, go, I'm not even sure what just happened. My approach to things got easier, and I'm not even sure what happened. One person was clear that, man, this is like the Holy Spirit moving. And another person was like, there's tons of different reactions to this that say, I'm not sure what I did. That's what a client response is. It just happened. Then time goes on and that awareness builds, because hindsight is 2020. And that awareness builds, and you're then able to look back and go, okay, I get it. I see how these things connect, and I see what happened. So in this case of the Scrooge, the biggest thing that happened was we told his story. We told the family story, and we told the story of why that was important. We added it to the company vision and values of what it is by adding prudence into their values. And we started to talk about and create ideas around what does it look like for every staff member, every employee at every level of the company to behave in a way that demonstrates that value. There was an opportunity of people taking a risk to step out, which is what I did going to that trade show, showed a return of investment. The owner got to also demonstrate that it wasn't a fear of spending money if there's a great return of investment that you could demonstrate. It was an entirely different story that, as it was told, it seems like obstacles just seemed to fall away and more people got on board. There was less dissension. There was less discrepancy and argument amongst each other and less finger pointing and everything else. At the end of the day, everyone got moving together in unison in some type of buy-in or belief as to what they were doing, and their why all became aligned, and goals naturally started to unfold as something positive. Another one is more along the lines of an owner that had a really difficult time not losing his temper. He would find something that wasn't working inside of his organization, and he would pick on it and dive into it and delve and just dig into that one problem. And that might be with an entry-level employee, but the process wasn't happening. It wasn't working well, and they needed to find out why. So they dug in, and then everyone's focus in the company, his COO, his everybody, like you just start looking across the board, everybody's all of a sudden focused on this little problem that seems little, and everyone's frustrated and angry and upset because why are we focusing on this little problem? And the owner had a thing for finding things that he knew if those things were happening, it meant that the values and the things that were important to him about how the company should run aren't running well. And that was the only way that he was finding a way to communicate what he was really thinking and feeling about the trajectory of the company and how people were directing it. The leaders that he had engaged over time weren't able to see through to the clarity of the mission and understand that concept of what was happening. It became a repetitive over and over of hitting a ceiling and falling, hitting a ceiling and falling, because there was a discrepancy where the leaders would be like, just let us run this, and yell at us if you need to, just let us run this, or get out of the way and let us run this. And that turned into a repetitive pattern of trying to fix it, trying to help, trying to move it forward, and then backing up. And then the company would hit this high, it would start to fall apart because no one had the vision. So, how do you help that individual bring his vision and carry the vision forward? All it was about, really, again, bringing all of the values that were important to him and driving those into the job descriptions and into the culture so that everyone in the company could begin to discuss and talk about how they are honoring those values in their behavior. So that when a pinpointing conversation came up that didn't speak to the higher values of the organization, you change the conversation of how. That was a very complex, more difficult thing to find because it became so personal to people and then became a cause. There had become a cause inside the company to protect people from these types of things happening, and it separated people. So one of the things that will help you move forward faster and smoother towards your goals is to get anyone helping you, anyone working with you, any of your team working all in the same direction. There was an organization that we went into and we started doing a series of workshops and a series of coaching for the executive team. And this executive team had a really large task ahead of them. They needed to bring about, I think at the time, the number grew, but at the time it was 20 or $30 million to the bottom line of this organization. And they were also going through a transition where the senior leader of this team, the division leader of this team, was moving on and was in the middle of a succession plan. The key executives that reported to this person were infighting and having problems. Infighting makes it sound bigger than it was, but they were butting up against each other and not understanding what was happening. Immediately coming in and having that strengths conversation as our anchor, as our start, to say, let's look at the value we do bring to the table. And the key in this one was more helping everyone get aligned, right? And then having the conversation, getting it on the table. This person's going to leave. It's not going to be a quick, easy transition. It's going to take time. The organization wants to consider the people that are the senior leaders on this team of who might become that leader. How do you, if you don't talk about that and give that some space and some room and get each other to support each other in what you think would be right, and at least get the open conversation of why you do or don't feel like that person would be a good fit. Now, with all of this being said, what is the greatest goal that we're looking for? After our first session and then the first few coaching sessions for each executive, one of the things that happened is they realized very quickly that they had taken some of their goals off the table and said, there's no way in this year we're going to make this happen. And after that first month or so from that first session, where there were major epiphanies of understanding each other, all of those goals were back on the table and they had added a few. And then they were beginning to increase that number that they were going to contribute to the bottom line. So instead of having a succession plan happening where there was a depreciation of value of the team, of what they were integrating, because there was a time of uncertainty that turned into confusion if it was allowed to stew, we were able to direct everybody back towards the goal, have the open conversations of what's happening, but everyone could then work well. The second series that we deployed in there was this idea of not being our strategies, this idea that you might think you know each other. You might really think you know each other, but in reality, what you really know about each other is the strategies that you're deploying towards these problems that you're working to solve, towards these goals you're trying to reach. And in a few of the cases, there was a very empathetic, I'm going to fix everything for everyone, that was very task-oriented leader. There was a very, I would say, also empathetic, but also super kind and quiet in their approach. And he understood how people were feeling and thinking and was very protective of his team and wanting to really control and nurture his team through what they were succeeding in. And then there was another leader that was more of a sledgehammer or a steamroller that was, we're going to get it done. There's clear expectations. We're going to make it happen. Boom. Now, if you can imagine this, there's a leader who's spinning, trying to keep everything moving and keep everyone happy, that is feeling very dysfunctional. and hiding it. And there's a leader that is becoming more and more protective. And there's a leader that's just trying to hit it with a hammer. And that's the only tool they have. As soon as they see those things as strategies and you bring in the sense of values and start looking at what values are we all honoring and where are we trying to go, it's just bringing it up to the highest level vision or goal or opportunity of what you're trying to reach, and then getting everyone to bring it down into this other opportunity of where you all finally align and agree, and looking at what we're valuing and what we can value as we work together, and then how within our strengths we can start to readjust and realign. Now, the person that was really empathetic and protective realized that was an overuse of his strengths, and they could be a little more directive. And they were overcompensating for the steamroller and trying to protect their team from the steamroller. So the entire teams now of over 100 people were not working well together. Now the steamroller says, wait a minute, I'm not really a steamroller. I'm pretty chill. I just learned these strategies from leaders I had seen before. But I'm miserable when I'm being that way. And we realized that person's driven, but the strategies they were using weren't really aligned with the greatest of themselves. And together in this group, we're able to discover a different way of moving forward that didn't come across the same as it was before, and allowed everything to soften and less protection and less aggression. The entire team put all the goals back on the table, added a few more. And I think their goal went up to $50 or $60 million that they were going to deliver on to the bottom line. And the next year it increased even further. So those are a couple of stories of, or if somebody asked me for case studies or things that help bring some light into what happens when we bring this process into an organization. Whether you're a strengths organization already or not, it doesn't really, there's no impact to this training based on what leadership processes your organization uses. Because the idea is to use all of the gifts, all of the strengths, all of the resources that you have at your disposal, and learn how each individual can move together and move towards a goal more effectively when you consider everyone's perspective and approach differently. When moving towards a goal, the best thing you can do is get aligned. How do you get aligned? Is by seeing the value of the reality of the truth. Be able to look in the mirror and have the real conversations. And then allow people's greatness to come out and see where it lands. In every engagement that is in a company where they're scaling and there's many people, somebody doesn't end up wanting to be there. Somebody finds, or they find a different position within the organization that they'd rather be in because they find where they're greatest. And these things begin to align, and the right people at the right time move forward and work together to make things happen. And many obstacles are naturally removed because we stop fighting the obstacles and we just start looking at them in a sense of awareness. We'll continue this conversation as we move forward through more of these weeks. In the time being, that is the point. And you'll have a wonderful day.
The show about achieving goals.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of The Point with me, Jeff Spikes. Please visit jeffspikes.com for everything you would need to know to engage with me offline. And lastly, thank you for your time, your attention, and your consideration. This is The Point.